Right, okay, just briefly, I'll just cover off what the Kickstart scheme is for those that don't know of it or not aware of it, and then we'll get into Cynthia giving her presentation. I'll let her share her screen and show you her presentation that she's worked really hard to put together. But for those that don't know the Kickstart scheme and haven't got in touch about it, then the Kickstart scheme is a government initiative, part of a £2 billion scheme to get young people back into work. So there's lots of young people 18 to 24 that have been made redundant or come out of university and college into no jobs. So the government's put a huge fund together to enable those people to get back into work through employers like you guys. So they'll fund 25 hours a week for 6 months for them to get a work placement with you, and it's a fantastic scheme for both the employees to kind of build up their portfolio, build up their confidence, skills, experience, qualifications, get that experience, and then the employers get the benefit of taking on certain huge people. So there's, can I just mute a few of you? So,
Can we?
all right. Let me see who's not on mute. I can't mute that person, but yeah, so if it just, I'll mute everyone. And then, yeah, so it's a fantastic opportunity for the employers to access the scheme. There's a hugely diverse talent pool out there of the 18 to 24-year-olds, ranging from, you know, people, graduates with 2 or 3 years experience in the workplace that have been made redundant, unfortunately, due to their business or sector really struggling, down to, you know, some really bright, talented, hardworking 18-year-olds. So, you know, we as a gateway, what we do is we help you access the scheme. For those that don't know, there's a few employers that recognise that we've already accessed the scheme through us, so they'd recognise that, and then we provide all the wraparound support that the DWP wants for these young people. So if you're interested in the scheme, just get in touch if you're not already on it through us. I'll pass you over to Cynthia now, who's a fantastic coach, and she's going to guide you on the principles that she wants to talk about, which we feel will be really, really beneficial for this particular scheme, because quite a few people might be working remotely. I'll let Cynthia tell you more about herself, and if you want to share your screen, Cynthia, feel free.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. I'm really looking forward to today's talk. I will just share my screen. So there we go. So welcome. And yeah, as Mark said, today we'll be talking about best practices for remote working, sort of touching on engagement and productivity in a remote working environment. So why am I here talking to you about this? Well, I have actually been utilizing remote working techniques and processes for over 20 years. I was quite early on in that thing, in the development of it all. And I've worked with people all over the world, teams in India, Israel, France, the United States. So yeah, it's been a really interesting process to see both the technology develop and to also learn what is good and bad about remote working, what can be really good and what can go really wrong, and how we can do that better. So I'm really excited to be here today to share some of these experiences with you. And yeah, apart from all that, these days I'm not in corporate anymore. I work as an executive and transformational coach, and I work with people who are leaders in their field who want to make a positive change. So I'll go through the little talk today, and at the end there's plenty of time for any questions that you may have, and yeah, we'll get straight into it. So as Mark probably sort of mentioned, you know, with the Kickstarter scheme, people coming on board, and with the pandemic going on as well, it's really forced businesses to take a different approach to how we work, because we were not allowed out the house anymore. So we had to work at home. And remote work as a process, as a concept, really got forced into businesses because it was that or nothing. And that's really meant that businesses have had to adapt to and adopt very different working practices. Or if not, they would have probably found one or two challenges. And because it's such a new approach for many businesses to learn, it's easy to sort of get a few things wrong. So today is really about raising a bit of awareness of what can happen, what the pitfalls are, and what things we can do to make that better. So why is all this important? Well, remote work really is the future of work. The pandemic, the last 12 months, has really challenged a lot of our beliefs around what is possible when people work from home. There's no longer those stories of, well, if my staff work at home, they're not productive, or can I trust them? All of that is gone. And actually, the workforce has really enjoyed the flexibility that it has given. They don't have to commute so much. They don't have the stress of sitting in a traffic jam on the motorway or anything like that. They have a lot more flexibility, and actually for businesses itself, there's probably been savings in terms of occupancy rates, offices, space, and things like that, or at least there's an opportunity for that. But it does bring with it a set of unique challenges. So where perhaps before, when working in the office, there were a number of challenges around team building, there was always a lot of focus on that and productivity. There's a whole different set of challenges, and some are similar when we work remote that we have to be aware of. So we'll talk a little bit through those. And I want to start with relationships in the workplace, because one of the biggest things that we can identify when we work remotely, when we're all dispersed, maybe in our houses or in different offices, is that teams start to feel fragmented. And what I have observed and experienced in my time working remotely is that sometimes it can create an us versus them mentality. And I've actually been to meetings where the battle lines were drawn long before the meeting, just because there was maybe a UK team and a US team or whatever, and they were not in each other's reality. So they had no consideration for the challenges that each might be facing. And that really created a lack of understanding, a lack of consideration, a lack of empathy for the rest of the situation. And it was caused by a lack of context. So to stay with that theme of lack, there was then a lack of rapport, and based on that, a lack of willingness to help each other. So what really needed to be done is to build trust and understanding, to build that rapport and to build better collaborative work and relationships. And that is just a little bit harder when people are not in the same space, because you have to make more of a conscious effort to do so. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And there's also some other challenges that I've listed here that I'll talk through now. So the relationship piece and that rapport and willingness to help each other is really, really important. And some of the things listed here are things that are challenges to creating those productive, collaborative relationships. So one would be a lack of information. When we're in the office, or when we're even on camera, there's information, there's context. You can see the space I'm in, you can see my face right now, you can see some of my body language at least. When you're in the office, you get all of that context, all of it. You can see if someone's fidgeting their hands under the table, or you can see if someone has that nervous, shaky leg thing going on, and you know that there's more going on than what is being discussed, or there's some discomfort. When we're just on camera, I could just sit very still like this, and I might be fidgeting or doing anything, and you'd never know. So there's a lot of information that we miss, a lot of context that we miss, a lot of body language, and it becomes a lot harder to know what's going on for a person. And when we're in that space, when we're missing information, what our brain does is it will work to fill in the blanks. And it won't very naturally do it by posing the questions. It will just create a story to fit in that blank space. And this is related to our biases. We all have biases based on our beliefs, our experiences, our values. So our brain will come up with a story and it will fill in that blank based on a bias, which may be subconscious or conscious. That means we are perhaps jumping to conclusions. Perhaps we are making assumptions. Perhaps we're making a snap judgment based on a strong opinion that we have based on our belief system. So all of this will lead us to miss really vital information because we've filled in our own story. And when we miss vital information, we stop building that rapport. And the thing that we need to do to overcome that is to ask open-ended question. But we wouldn't think to ask the open-ended question naturally, necessarily, because our brain has already filled in the story, the blank. So there's an awareness here that's required to know about biases, to know about assumptions, to really notice when we make them, to notice how we react in situations. Because all of that will help us to avoid miscommunication and misunderstanding. So the third one on the list there is all about uncertainty. Working remotely, and even working in an office, but it's definitely more of an impact when we work remote, it increases a sense of uncertainty. Now, uncertainty can be really, really nuanced. It can be microscopic. It can be just little questions. So say we're in an open plan office, there's maybe 10 people working away at their desk, and someone over in that corner has to ask a question of someone over in that corner. They can look over, they can see how busy they are, they can see the context, the whole situation, and they can make a decision whether this would be a good time to start that conversation or not. A lot of information, no uncertainty, clarity, and they can take action. Great. When you don't have all that information, or perhaps when the only indicator that someone is available is a status on a messenger tool that says green or available or red in a meeting or whatever it might say, there's little questions that instantly start popping into our minds. Are they free? How will they react? What all that context of the other person's situation is missing. So that can create uncertainties, nuanced microscopic uncertainties. And a thing that's maybe a relatable example that I've certainly encountered in my teams over the years is when you're in a meeting with someone and they take some actions away and you talk about how they're going to complete the action. Maybe they have to ask someone for information. You say, well, give them a call and find out. Easy, done. And they say, yeah, I'll send them an email, because something's stopping them from feeling comfortable picking up that phone. That's a real good example of where those nuanced uncertainties kick into play that will actually create a sense of, well, uncertainty, but of worry, concern, and even fear as they compound, that will block people from taking action. So being aware of that piece is really, really helpful. When people are experiencing some of these uncertainties, or perhaps they've already spiraled into fear, it can really spiral into, in a negative way, into self-doubt, into a lack of self-belief. And that can lead to that disengagement and even isolation. So we start to come up with these stories about how we're performing. We start to come up with what value, what our contribution is to the organization, because we are kind of isolated in our own little bubble. We're not connecting with people as much, and things start to feel overwhelming. We disengage and we become more isolated. Of course, when we're in the office, it's harder to do because you're around people and there's all the little social activities that go on, like maybe there's an office birthday, so there's a cakes and fruit somewhere that people gather and have a little chat, the kitchen chat on the stairs, or maybe a lunchtime walk, all of these things where people can connect, communicate outside of the immediate work setting have disappeared. So that's something that is important to be cognitive of, to be aware of, to maybe do something about. So I'll get to some of that. Now, also, when people are, and this is probably more specific to the Kickstarter scheme, it's true at all levels, to be honest, but people new to the workplace or potentially new to the workplace, they haven't got as much experience. And also, they have a lot to learn. So when we talk about a steep learning curve, that bit that's really steep is also really uncomfortable. It can be. And when we're in that place, it's really easy to start questioning ourselves. And that can happen, again, in so many ways. It can be really nuanced, it can be really big. So it's really interesting to think about how that impacts particularly young people entering the workforce. And that inexperience piece, people might not have the experience of an office dynamic. Perhaps people's only experience, if they've left school in the last 12 months, is to work remotely or not to work at all. So it's really interesting how that will play into creating the team. And also work ethic, because people talk about work ethic sometimes as if it's something you get from your parents, but actually it's a skill and an attitude that can be learned. And it's learned most effectively when work ethic is modeled effectively and consistently. So the thing you want to see, the thing you want your people to be modeled as part of the leadership in your organization. So let's talk then a little bit about what is required to make remote work well for your organization. And really what I believe is that it cuts across the whole of your organizational culture. But I have condensed it into the 4 C's, if you like: culture, communication, community, and capability. And I'll talk a little bit through these 4 C's now. So we'll start with culture. Obviously, this is quite a big area, and there's quite a lot to cover probably here, but I'll just cover a little bit of a high-level overview. So first and foremost, as part of your culture, your organizational culture, you will have a set of core values, and making sure that they are a strong set of values that are clearly communicated and consistently modeled, that's that modeling again, is really, really important, so that people really know what is required of them to be, to be aligned to that set of values, to work within that culture. And actively encouraging and enabling open communication is another piece. It allows for ideas to flow. When people can freely come up with ideas, like the most innovative things can happen, which is really exciting. And actually, when someone comes into a workforce new, or into the workplace, into your business new, with a fresh perspective, they might look at an existing problem that you've had for 6-12 months and you haven't really found a way around, and just come up with something that may not be the final solution, but at least it's a real good new way of looking at it that can be developed into something. So giving space to those ideas, which can be raised when there's real open communication, is extremely powerful and can make a real difference to your business. Creating transparency in your communication as well, that allows for that open communication. Transparency is really important. Again, it leads back to those microscopic, nuanced uncertainties that can block people from taking action, that can block people from speaking up, because maybe they have fears about how they will be perceived. Maybe they have beliefs about their own ability or their place within the team. And then there's the thing that I think every organization wants to avoid, which is a blame culture, because when things get tough, when there's a tight deadline, when there's perhaps mistakes that are made that are a problem, it's at those times that modeling of the values and that communication piece becomes so important to create that environment where employees can grow and develop into what they do. So the final point that I want to make on culture really is around developing strong leadership skills. And this is a really key point: leadership and self-leadership. Now, I'm not for any second saying that there should be any abdication of the actual leadership team, nor am I saying that everyone in the organization should be a leader. But having leadership skills, developing self-leadership, can really help create an awareness and a personal responsibility and an empowerment in employees. And that can make a real big difference for how they show up. It creates an opportunity for individuals to self-manage and see how their behavior impacts on the organization and to manage their performance in their role. And again, it's not about abdicating leadership responsibilities. It is about creating a culture of leaders with traits and skills that flow from awareness that allows people to really show up and be in their role and perform to their best and speak freely and communicate. And that in turn will help people with that raised awareness to understand more when their own bias kicks in. It will help them separate opinion from fact. It will help them with jumping to conclusions, making judgments, or making assumptions. And all of those things will help to build rapport and enable that communication piece, even from a distance. So the next C then is all about communication. I've actually spent some time thinking about this because part of me feels that actually it requires a lot of communication, which in a way it does. But what is far more important is that the communication is of high quality. Now, communication is often thought about as speaking. When we talk about communication, we think about expressing ourselves, how we come across. And actually, yes, of course, that's communication, but hearing, listening is perhaps an even more important part of communication. Because when you can really hear what's being said and you're listening not to respond, but to receive information and to work with that information, the response that you eventually will give is very different to the one that you sort of thought of as the other person was still speaking. So that's a really key point, having real quality communication. Clarity as well. When you create time and space for open and transparent dialogue and creating an engaged team, it becomes much easier to be really clear on the goals, the objectives, the tasks, and the progress. And that can be managed. There's some great tools, by the way, software systems and everything, and some are paid. You can have some free solutions that you can use to manage all this clarity and this communication, because it can be not just in spoken, it can be in written and audio and all sorts of different formats. Having clarity on these things and having those clear across the team is really, really important. Everyone knows what's expected of them. There is a set of common processes, common structures, roles and responsibilities. All that stuff is clear. So people can use that and ask questions about it because there's open dialogue all the time. The next thing really is around understanding local variations. Because especially when people are working perhaps in their own space, there may be restrictions, limitations that wouldn't be there in the office. So understanding what they are, maybe they live on a mountaintop and there's very little or very poor internet connection. That would be a big problem to try and overcome. Maybe, they've had a lot of kids at home because the schools have been shut, and that would have been a problem. Maybe there's other things going on. It becomes a lot more varied as to what is happening in the context of someone's work environment. So that's another thing that needs checking in on and really finding out, and not just saying, how are you? Good. Okay, let's move on. It's like, what's going on for you today? What's going on for you this week? Open-ended questions that will invite a different response. Communication. So The third C is for community. Now, in a remote working environment, the role of the manager is likely to change over time. It may have started happening already. A manager traditionally is someone who manages the team as well as does the job. So there's a lot going on. They sort of do, and then they manage the team as well. With a remote working environment, with that higher need for high quality touch points, for perhaps more frequent touch points, there is an added workload on the manager for employee well-being, employee engagement, productivity, and that can become a really difficult thing. So there's obviously a number of ways around this, but one thing that you can use right now without making too many changes, is to leverage your internal community. This is so that you can facilitate and establish that different level of connection that is needed. So some examples would be maybe a buddy system, buddying people up so that they're sort of connected in a different way and they can have conversations. A mentoring system, which is really helpful, you know, buddying people up at different levels of the organization, that can help and teach, and they can learn from each other, different perspectives. There are also things that can replace some of the activities that would take place in the office. So if before people would naturally meet up in the office kitchen for a cup of tea around 10:15, you might just open up a virtual room like Zoom, like Teams, whatever it is, where people can drop in and have a conversation. Or technology, you know, you can do so much. Encouraging people to take a break at lunchtime and maybe go for a walk is a very helpful thing to do, to build connection, to encourage communication in a context outside of work, and for people to be out, to move around and to walk. And you can do that even though we can't currently see each other. The phone, headphones, take your phone with you, maybe record your walks on Strava so people can see where people are and share that experience in a digital way. There is so much that is possible. I don't know if anyone has been on a new social media platform called Clubhouse yet, but that would allow for an audio room for your entire team to just have a conversation, which is pretty exciting stuff. And also, another idea would be learning sessions. So whether you have maybe a virtual book club, or maybe someone wants to learn a different skill, or people are sharing their interests, just like an hour every so often or regularly, where people can share and learn from each other outside of the context of work. It all helps to build that rapport, to create more understanding, build those relationships, and enable productivity. So the final C here is around capability. And capability is really bringing together the technology and the ability of people to use that technology. So the availability of the technology, the features of the technology, and people's ability and confidence to use it. So here it's really about finding solutions that really suit your needs. And I know, having worked in implementing some of these systems in my corporate career, that this can get a bit crazy. Finding out the requirements, finding out what everyone wants, finding the right solution, trying to match the solution to the requirements, all of this can get really, really complex. And I think it doesn't really need to be. Sometimes there are a lot of solutions out there that can even be free or very low cost that would really suit organizations of all sizes. Plus, there's the option of leveraging existing social media platforms. So depending on the sensitivity of the data in your business, depending on, you know, the sort of security concerns that you might have, there's a lot you can do with existing social media. So there's options there to create virtual environments for people to collaborate, to talk, and to do more. The next part is enabling continuous learning and training, because people have to be confident. Again, I'm going back to those nuanced uncertainties that will stop people taking action. It's all about what you don't know. So learning all the time on the technology is really important. And especially if you use a software solution that perhaps is updated at source, so there's nothing within your own infrastructure that you're doing, you're using a software as a service and they're updating, you might just get an email once a month of the changes that are coming in that goes into an IT information inbox and never sees the light of day again. So it's really important to understand the changes that happen so that people can react and learn what's going on. And again, a buddying system, a mentoring system can really help with this. And finally, just getting regular user feedback. Does the solution still serve the purpose? Does it help? Does it make things easier? Does it make it more difficult? If people say it's difficult, is it because it is difficult, or is it because there's a gap in the knowledge? All of these things. So that is really the final part of the 4 C's. And in summary then, what I think is true is that when we change our working practices, and I think some of these changes are going to be here for the long haul, we require changes to how we work and the company culture. Raising awareness is absolutely key. This is, in my opinion, leadership comes a lot from awareness, self-awareness and awareness of what happens around us, because we manage our the way we react to things so that we can lead and model the behaviors that we want to see. So awareness is absolutely key in terms of leadership skill. Everything flows from that. Creating a supporting and open and engaging environment with open, transparent communication and leveraging that community, because it's a team effort. And everyone in that team can contribute to creating that connection, as well as the technology. But having the people use the technology to create that connection is really the thing that we need to get right in this situation. So that was me in summary. There'll be some time for questions now, but I would be really happy to connect with all of you. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to send me an email. As I mentioned, I'm an executive and transformational coach. I do coaching and mentoring. I help with leadership skills development, and I can consult on business change implementation and structure and process development as well. So it's been a real pleasure just giving this presentation today. And are there any questions?
If anyone wants to just ask a question, just unmute yourself and switch your camera on if you want to. You don't have to switch your camera on if you're sitting there in your pajamas or whatever. But yeah, just any questions, just feel free to ask them. Leslie just said no questions, but she really enjoyed listening to the presentation, Cynthia. So thanks for that, Leslie. Thanks, Cynthia.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah. Has anyone got any questions around the practical application of this with young people 18 to 24 specifically? Well, we've got, the benefit of having Cynthia here live.
I'll ask a question.
Right.
Yeah, hi Cindy, that was great. Thank you. I found that really useful. Do you find that with the younger people, because I mean we've sort of had a case of both really, that we've got sort of younger people joining the organisation, but then sort of I guess more established, more experienced people as well. And I've actually found that it's the younger people are better at adopting a lot of these especially new technology. Maybe it's they're more used to it. But do you find there's a discrepancy between sort of demographics and age groups in terms of adopting and using consistently this new technology that we're all having to get used to at the moment?
Absolutely. I was thinking about whether to bring this up today or not, but I like to think of myself as a young whippersnapper,
Yeah.
even though I may not be entirely. And I think officially I would be classed as a Gen X person. But anyone from millennials, so the 90s onwards, they have grown up with technology in their hands, particularly anyone from the noughties onwards. So they are the people that are around about 20 now. 18 to 20 in late 90s. They have had tablets in their hands from the minute they could hold on to stuff, probably. So it's really interesting that they would adapt to the technology in a very different way, and that creates great opportunity for the rest of us to learn, I think.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. That's great.
Does that answer the question? Is there anything else I can add to that?
No, that answers it. I think that I've certainly found that, and that we probably had to do less sort of teaching when it comes to the young people. They often teach me how to use some of these platforms better than I was before. So yeah, I've certainly found that with we've had an apprentice, and now we're looking to sort of make use of the Kickstart scheme as well. And like I say, the younger people seem very au fait with all this stuff. So it works quite well.
I think also what it gives, Henry, is a really nice diversity to, because you're always going to have people of different generations in your working environment, that tends to be the case. So leveraging those different perspectives can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? I would love to answer a few more, seeing as we're all here.
Yeah, if no one's going to front up, I'll ask a couple that kind of come up on the phone calls I have with people around the Kickstarter scheme. So, some people have some qualms around kind of, some people it's their first employee, so they're an early stage business, or they've been small and they wanted to use the scheme as a way to kind of grow but take the risk out of it. Do you think there's any difference if it's your first?
Yeah, I think some of the top things that I mentioned, the first things that I mentioned around values, what are the values and the traits that you want to see in your business? Because you'd have to get clear on those first. I think that's a really great place to start. So think about, how do we want to work together? Is this an environment of hard work, deep focus? Is this an environment where we can have a laugh and a giggle, where we have trust and open communication? Am I more disposed as a person? And there's some inflection required here to being a boss that likes to tell people what to do, as opposed to modeling leadership. So there's some questions there that probably be really helpful for those people to answer for themselves, and then being able to bring that piece to the people they bring in.
Yeah, and another thanks for that, Cynthia, that's really useful. And another kind of common thing that comes up is people either don't have an office or they can't get access to the office at the moment. And we discussed this before we let everyone else in. That kind of, we've been conditioned to kind of think that you're only really working if you're in our office. So what would you say to those people that specifically think young people might be more at risk of being either not supported properly by the employer, or from the employer's side, just their concern is they're sitting at home watching Netflix and not doing any work?
Yeah. So in terms of the support piece from the employer's side, it is really important to keep an open mind and to be inquisitive about their situation with open questions, and to really encourage that open dialogue without judgment, so that people, the younger generation, can feel safe. And interestingly, I think the younger generations that are coming through now, so the people that are being targeted by the Kickstart scheme, they thrive in the more flexible working environment. A 9 to 5 may feel restrictive, they might get their really creative ideas at 11 o'clock at night. So they might just jump back on their computer at 11 o'clock at night and do a piece of work. But then they might just start a little bit later in the morning because, you know, they were up a bit late with a flash of inspiration. But it really allows them to work in a way that suits them. So that flexibility, and I appreciate there has to be a level of commonality for people to be able to come together, because if everyone just chooses their own working hours, you can never catch a time in the diary. That's hard enough as it is. But that flexibility actually encourages a lot of inspiration for people.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Yeah, we mentioned briefly a blended approach. So would you kind of advise that for those people that do have offices and do have a, you know, previous structure of work? I mean, some jobs you can't, obviously, you know, if you work in a factory or you work on a shop floor or whatever, you know, you can't really do remote working too much, can you? But, you know, for those people that are thinking about a blended approach, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I really like the idea of the blended approach. The thing that I've found about this, and I don't know if anyone else has thought about this, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this. If you have a 5-day working week and you impose 2 or 3 days a week in the office and 2 or 3 days a week at home as a blended approach, how do you pick the days? Is there 1 or 2 days a week that everyone has to be in the office and the other days are flexible? Because if everyone, again, just picks whenever, then you don't meet each other still, which may be okay. Because if you still require everyone in the office at the same time on 1 or 2 days, you can't reduce any of your occupancy. So it's finding that balance. And maybe depending on the size of the organization, you know, if it's a small organization, it might not matter so much. But if you have a bigger organization, then you might need to think about that a little bit.
That's a really interesting point, because the way the Kickstart scheme works as well, you get referrals from within a 90-minute radius of where you've said the office is. So some people are looking for truly remote people, so they're not bothered where in the country they are. Other people are looking for remote people, but actually they want them to be within travelling distance of being able to meet them at a frequency that they decide in the office or somewhere for a coffee or whatever it is. So is there anything around that you'd add, whether, you know?
Yeah, do you know, I think that's a really individual choice. If you're happy to make it work, because I don't think there's a limitation with the technology today. I don't believe there's a limitation anymore. So I think it's an individual choice as to what really works for people.
Yeah, one of the companies on the scheme, they're a really interesting business. I won't name them for confidential reasons, but the people that I've spoken to, some are in London, some are in the Middle East, some are in France, you know, so, you know, most of them, you know, they are truly remote. They're very unlikely to ever get together, or it's not going to be easy, is it? So, you know, they are a truly remote business. So they're looking for anyone anywhere in the UK. So it doesn't really bother them where they are. They're used to managing people remotely. Other people, you know, are managing people remotely would like to, you know, meet them on a frequency. So, you know, just meeting for a coffee once a week or something like that, or once a month, or over side.
The thing that I find with people who are truly remote, from my experience before when travel was still allowed, inevitably travel would happen because people would get curious. People would want to meet in person. We had development teams at one point in the Ukraine. That was really great. But actually, for that rapport, for those relationships, we ended up bringing them over for like a week. So you end up paying for the travel and everything else, because inevitably that will happen. So that's something to consider when you do go fully remote. At one point or another, you will probably want to meet in person. And when you do, you will probably have to pay the travel costs. But other than that, I honestly think there's no no limitations. I think meeting in person for coffee is one of my favorite things to do. That's why there's a cup of coffee at the bottom of my last slide. But yeah, we've been doing that via Zoom for the last 12 months, I guess.
Yeah, and there's probably a whole other webinar just based on the other side of the coin, the employee side, how to manage it from their side, and can, you know, make sure that the boss or the employer is happy and they're getting the best out of themselves as well, isn't there? So maybe we could think about that for all the employees at some point, so that they're getting the other side of the coin and getting some great information from you as well.
Because it's their responsibility as well to create that self-leadership, to create that awareness, and to be open and honest. And that can take, sometimes it can feel risky, it can feel uncomfortable, maybe you have to be a bit courageous or brave in tiny steps or even bigger steps. And, you know, taking individuality into account and you know, well-being in general can really impact some of these things. So yeah, and there's definitely responsibility on the employee. Yeah.
Okay, so is there any other questions from
anyone? I had another question on something that we've looked at recently, as the business grows, the idea of creating like an employee handbook. And I mean, I'm sort of, I guess there's numerous schools of thought in terms of what should go into that. But in your experience, Cynthia, what makes a good employee handbook? So it's not restrictive in terms of, still allows employees to be themselves and sort of bring their own sort of personality to the role and all that's something we want to encourage, but to sort of give them guidelines and key bits of information that allow them to get on with their job effectively and in line with our sort of vision and values. But yeah, just sort of be interested in your experience, what makes a good employee handbook?
Yeah, I think employee handbooks are vital, and especially for the smaller companies, there are actually sort of independent HR organizations that will really help you with that. So if this is something that you know you want to meet some people about, I probably know one or two that can help with that. In terms of what should be in it, often the employee handbook is almost a bit of a flexible extension of the employment contract. So things that you want to have in place, but that you don't want to have to go through a contractual change for, because negotiating a contractual change with an employee is a very different beast than making an update to the employee handbook. So it could be rules around, you know, the flexibility in working hours. It definitely has to contain that vision, that mission, the purpose, your values. That has to be at the start of it. But other than that, it's a description of how you will all work together. So I think that's a really good summary of what should be in there, if that helps. It's very brief, but there's you can add processes and structures to it and things like that. It just depends.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we very much see it sort of a guide, but around some sort of core principles that we want to implement for everyone, and it sort of applies both, I guess, internally and externally. So when we're communicating with each other, but then also when we're representing the business externally, with the same principles and values apply.
Yeah.
Cool. That's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Sounds really good. I would love some more questions. I know you're all there. If you're thinking about them and you just want to email them afterwards, that's fine too, but I'd be happy to spend some more time answering any questions. Okay, maybe I have a question for you. What have you all found to be the best thing and the hardest thing about working remotely?
Everyone shy. Go on, Henry.
Yeah, I'll answer that. I mean, I think for me, it's been that human contact. I think that's been a negative that I would say, and I certainly see as things start changing, we've as a business very much thought that we will continue working even when we're allowed to sort of go back into the office. We'll probably continue working, maybe not exclusively remotely, but it'll be a blended approach, as you mentioned before. And actually, the idea of getting together in an office becomes as much of a social experience as it does essential for the work that we're doing. We can all do our jobs. I mean, we're a software business and we can all work remotely. It doesn't impact our ability to do the job. But I think that when it comes to certain aspects of what we do in terms of how productive we are, how easily we're able to collaborate, having that human contact more often than not does make a difference to that, and has an effect on the quality of work that we're able to produce. So I think that, yeah, the challenge that I've found is just that, I mean, you spend 3 days and you think, I've not seen another human being in person for 3 days, and that does have an effect. But then I think there are positive aspects to it as well. That the flexibility, I noticed someone just put in the chat flexibility, and I would definitely agree with that, you can work sort of more flexible hours when you're working from home, and taking time out of work to maybe do things that you wouldn't be able to do if you were office based, does actually in some ways make you more productive, because you have that sort of 3-4 hours of hard work being very productive, and then you take a couple of hours out to do things that you maybe need to do around the house, or you need to sort of go out and walk the dog, or whatever it might be, but then you're not then you're sort of coming back having done that, and you straight back into work, and then you have another productive 3 or 4 hours that maybe you wouldn't have as much if you were bound to a desk in an office. So yeah, I've found the flexibility of working from home probably more beneficial.
Yeah, I think the flexibility is definitely, and Stephen, I think you said flexibility in the chat. I don't know if you found that a good or a bad thing, but I think it's been good for everyone on the whole, mostly. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Stephen, whether that was good or bad for you.
Oh, very good. It was good. And it means that you can do something at different times of the day. Actually, I think that there's a danger of you being too flexible though, and actually working a lot longer than you would do normally. You know, the commute is actually some time when you're not doing work, as it were, even though a commute, I mean, I don't, you know, missing the commute is not something that I can say is really, you know, the commute I don't want to do ever again. But sometimes I think you think, oh, I can use that time that I would have commuted. But then again, that could put another 2 hours on your working day, because you actually think, oh, I'll make use of the time that I was commuting. So it can be almost like you work too much. So that flexibility, you just got to be aware about it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There has to be some boundaries created within your working at home routine, if you like, to make sure that flexibility stays a positive. And actually, when people have a tendency to do those extra couple of hours of work, maybe because they feel under pressure, they feel really busy, that would be a really good conversation to have with either a manager or a buddy, or, you know, some way of finding that, managing that situation with the people. And Henry, to your point as well about the difficulty with connecting with people, I think there's ways of recreating that digitally, but we still hold beliefs about how good our connection is with people when we are on Zoom. So it's interesting because we can start challenging those stories as well about how effective we can be digitally and how well we can build the relationships. Excellent. So it's sort of 4 minutes to the hour mark. Is there anything else I can add to what I've said today for anyone?
Yeah, just if anyone else has got any other questions, if not, we'll thank Cynthia for her time, and so on and so forth. So I think, yeah, due to the pause, that's probably time to wrap it up. So yeah, thanks for the comments, everyone. There's loads of comments in the chat, Cynthia, about how useful it's been and all those sort of things. So yeah, so thanks, Cynthia, for your expertise and your time. It's really, really appreciated. If anyone doesn't know about the Kickstart scheme, hasn't registered, then please get in touch. We'll email you the slides, and we'll email you a copy of the YouTube video. We'll put this up on YouTube so you can watch it back in your own time as well, if you want to review it or share it with anyone else. Yeah, and if you, like I said, if you've not used the Kickstart scheme, if you're not using it to help your business bounce back and grow in 2021, then give us a shout and we can help you with that.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's been a real pleasure. I'd be happy to connect with all of you on LinkedIn, and feel free to email me, or if you want to discuss anything further, I'm here.
That's great. Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks, Mark, as well. Cheers.
Take care, guys.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.